How do we unlock data? Data democratization. We've got to get to that point. We have to make sure that people can access data and they can understand it. Gone are the days where you didn't trust people with data. Data is everywhere. They're getting it. Make sure the data is accurate, because if people don't trust the data, then everything that comes out of it is not helpful.
AI is all the speak. We're talking about LLMs a lot nowadays, but AI, machine learning, has been in marketing for well over a decade. It's been kind of table stakes for a long, long time. And so we have to prevent ourselves from being the bright, shiny object people. We have to kind of be able to see what is coming down the pike. How can we utilize it? And maybe most importantly, when is the right time to utilize it?
I believe people are every organization's secret sauce. If you can enable your people and get them hooked up with all this extra power that AI could presumably provide, the world could be your oyster. There's a lot of opportunity.
Of course, you have to have the right questions. You have to have the most accurate and precise information. But probably what should make everyone out there listening feel a little bit better is you still need the right people. Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we're doing a roundtable. We have 3 guests today, each of them with their own unique expertise. Instead of me introducing everybody, because that just takes a little bit too long, I'm just going to pass it around the horn. I'm going to start with you, Kevin. Kevin, please introduce yourself, tell us your name, and tell us where you are and what do you do?
What do I do? We don't have that kind of time. My name is Kevin McEvilly. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for a company called Canvas Worldwide.
Mike?
Hey, this is Mike Della Porta. I am the founder of Della Porta Consulting.
And Andy?
Name is Andy Fox. I'm the CEO and founder of Unista.
All right. Now, for those of the audience, they don't know what any of these, it's probable they don't know what any of your 3 companies do. But so I'm going to pass around the mic one more time. Give us a little quick blurb of what your company's specialty is. We'll start with Kevin.
We're in the advertising space. We work in a subset called media. We're heavy in data, heavy in analytics, but also financial controls. Right? Because we do a lot of fiduciary work on behalf of our clients in the US market.
Mike.
Yeah, I've worked on the agency side, same as Kevin, for the last 20 years or so. And the last 18 years at a firm called Butler Till, independent marketing agency, employee owned. And I served formerly as CTO and COO, CIO, and decided to make the leap and start my own consulting business a few months ago. And so I now engage with agencies and brands to help them with digital transformation and helping them evolve their business capabilities.
And then lastly, Andy.
Sure. Unista is a product development, data management, design, and consulting company. We tend to build bespoke products for customers in various different business verticals, from telemarketing to AI to financial services. And of course, we work closely with Canvas in the marketing and advertising space.
Excellent. Now, the reason why we said yes to have all 3 of you on the show is because I think your industries specifically touches on something that most of us, while we experience it, most consumers have no idea how complicated marketing actually has become, right? We see an ad on TV and we think, oh, we got served an ad. We see an ad maybe on a social media platform, we got served an ad. But I know that brands are asking for more than that. They are asking for you to connect to devices, to, device data. They're trying to do all kinds of different targeting to make the best experience possible. And we read a stat about how some of the biggest marketing companies nowadays, that media and advertising is actually a smaller component of their portfolio business than ever before, that it's become like a technology business, that brands are constantly asking marketing agencies to come up with basically technology-based solutions to create things that their customers love and enjoy. So tell us what is happening, because there was this belief that, cookieless is going to go away, or cookies were going to go away, and we're going to gain more privacy. And then the brands are like, oh, wait a second, we got to figure out a way around that. Give us an idea. Any one of you can raise your hand and be like, chime in. What is happening in the marketplace right now? What is the technological demand that companies are now asking of you?
Let me kick it off. Agencies were always technology focused, right? The professional service is pulling it together and giving it back to a client in a coherent way. But we have, our programmatic team is a perfect example. They introduced themselves as technologists. Our ad ops team introduces themselves as technologists. People who buy legacy media are technologists. They're buying digital out of home. They're buying connected TV. They're understanding data. They're taking optimization information and working it into how they're doing their jobs. They have always done this. It's just that it's coming faster and there are more sources out there. So there's an education component that takes place. There's a data organization and governance component, which is making, I don't know about Mike and Andy, but it's making me old because it's coming in from everywhere. And how do you get your arms around it? Instead of getting your arms around it, you throw some broader guardrails around it and you start to talk about corporate data governance and other items to deal with it. But again, right back to it, they have always been technologists in addition to the professional services as strategists, as investment people, as financial people. How do we handle it? Well, Mike, you want to pick it up and then I'll ride your coattails on that because there are any number of adjectives that I could use.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, I completely agree with Kevin. It's complicated. So especially in the media space where you're slinging information from so many decentralized places. You have a few walled gardens, but the bottom line is things are incredibly fragmented, and there's not a great deal of standardization or governance for hardly any of it. So a lot of that really comes down to the agency's ability to collect, transform, and warehouse and visualize information in all these different ways. Now you have the specter, the opportunity, the challenge of artificial intelligence knocking at the door as well. So I agree with Kevin. Agencies have always been technical in nature. I think the composition of talent that it takes to get the work done and to do really good quality work is decidedly technical. And I think a lot of agencies are looking at partners to help reinforce the capabilities or augment the capabilities that they have. And I think that's where, folks like Andy really can kind of save the day.
Yeah. And I was going to say, building on top of that, I was working with agencies back when data could be stored in a couple Excel files. And, that is obviously
I've cleaned those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That has grown into kind of like your aggregate level data sources where you're dealing with millions or tens or hundreds of millions of records. And at that time, there was a whole other kind of cottage industry of CDPs, customer data platforms that were going out there dealing with log level data. But now agencies are kind of assumed to also be a CDP themselves, so also collect this log level data in addition to the aggregate level data. And the needs, the technology needs to just underpin all of that, make sure it's all clean, make sure it's all accurate, and then do something with it on top of it are growing. You kind of marry that with the cookieless piece that you mentioned. How do we marry up this huge amount of data with clean rooms so that we could start to marry together not just my enormous amount of data, but everybody else's enormous amounts of data into something that's usable and yet still, privacy centric. I mean, it's just kind of compounding as time goes on, the kind of data and then thusly the technology needs that hang off of that.
And I'm going to take it a step further, Albert, before you jump on in.
Yeah.
Because I've been known to say after a beer or two that, the words AI, the letters AI, the words artificial intelligence suck all the oxygen out of a room when you're trying to have a conversation. All this other stuff still has to happen before AI can be effective for any organization. Right. In fact, it's more critical now that we do this kind of stuff. So if the governance was hard before, now all of a sudden when you let an algorithm, when you let a large language model go to town on the data in a secure and private way, everyone, then all of a sudden you turn around and say, all right, now how important are those foundations? How important are the underpinnings? How important is to make sure that the data is 100% clean so you're not throwing bad signals out there? And so these things are kind of pulling at each other from either side in a good way. It's a healthy conversation. There's a natural tension in this whole thing. And as an industry and in general for AI, I think it's very, very helpful. But again, there's no silver bullet here. These foundational items are critical for everybody to be successful in that space.
So here's my, interesting question is, who is expected to make the investment in the infrastructure to handle what was coming? Imagine seamless customer experiences, fast internet, and the bandwidth required to embrace new technologies. Are you ready to experience the network that makes it all possible? There's no network quite like Zayo's. With North America's largest independently owned fiber network, Zayo provides the backbone, connecting your organization to what's next. Thousands of data centers to cloud on-ramps, towers, and points of presence. Zayo's network carries massive amounts of data globally every single day. What really sets Zayo apart is their coast-to-coast routes spanning from Canada into Mexico that you simply won't find anywhere else. The most innovative companies choose Zayo because they are not just connecting places, but connecting what's next for you. Discover the power of Zayo's network today. www.zayo.com/network. All right. Because for example, I read, and this is an old number, it said that OpenAI, the costs are over $700,000 a day to operate. I think it's probably bigger than that now, right? But like that's what like the GPT costs were.
The statistic that blows me away is the big three or the big four, the amount they spent on capital investment in 2024 was larger than the combined GDP of 5 European countries. And when you put it in that, I mean, it is enormous. It's absolutely enormous.
So who is expected to bear because, okay, if you're an agency, of course, the client eventually will have to, pay for some of it, but I don't know if they're thinking of it like, oh, well, this is just cloud, so I only have to pay what I use. Or we have hard costs that we're going to actually buy the hardware to produce this data or move this data. Like, I don't think people have any concept of how hard it is to move terabytes of data. Like for anyone who wants to go to a network calculator, go type in 1 gig line and try to move 100 terabytes and find out that you're basically not going to be done for weeks.
That was Andy's weekend 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, can't you just move it? People think it's like moving like an Excel file. Like,
yeah. You're giving me some PTSD, but yeah.
Because, that was the whole promise of cloud is I make, if I'm AWS, I make all the capital investment. You guys share in and I bill you for your usage, but I'm still the one fronting the $1 billion building or whatever the case may be. With every brand wanting to do this, who is being responsible for, I guess, the technical investment? Like, where is that coming from? Who's owning all the hardware? Is cloud the only way to do this? What's going on?
The short answer is it's complicated. But the real answer is it's an ongoing dialogue and education with brands and clients, right? And so, in the agency world, we have a couple of legacy models in terms of, how business is done. Back in the day, it was very much, commission oriented. Now it's more of a time and material kind of model. Sometimes it's a blend of both, depending on what we're talking about. But when you start to get into the technological investment, the cloud infrastructure, most of this is consumption based. It really is a conversation with brands to help them understand what that investment looks like, and also a conversation around like who owns it. Is it your instance? Is it our instance? Whose governance are we using? Right? There's so much alignment that needs to happen. And marketing's sort of a funny animal. And a lot of the brands that I worked with, marketing brand owners tend not to have access to their own IT resources. The IT folks and the folks that are working at more the enterprise level for analytics and business intelligence, they're worried about other things. They're not so much focused and allocated to marketing. So I think that's where a lot of agencies get engaged to develop and augment capabilities that the brand should have at their disposal, but they don't. So they outsource it. And it gets tricky because then you have to make sure that you're abiding by everything under the mothership without getting into territory that starts to look like shadow IT.
And boy, it sure does look like shadow IT, doesn't it, Mike? When you're sitting in your old chair or my chair, right? And you try to figure it out. If we roll back to Albert's base question, you all, if you know me, you've heard me say it 100 times. This is a professional service. And so we have to invest in this. But as a professional service, we need to be able to turn to our clients, to our prospective clients and say, this job is not what it was 10 years ago when you went to market and priced it. This is a vastly different job that has a different rate scale against that as you move on in. Those are tough conversations to have. Right. But that's what the client organization is about, right? That's why an articulate CEO that's excited about this, a chief client officer who can explain it, and then teams that put together the scope of work. And interestingly enough, the critical nature of a finance department that can really do proper client profitability analysis to say, here's the real cost. Let's be transparent about what that real cost is with you as we have these conversations. The hard area that I think that Mike pointed out is a lot of this is a gray area. Who owns what? What's the true cost? In a consumption model, you're going to put your finger up to the wind and say, how close is this? Or, how close is our estimate? And hopefully you have a good team to do that. But it's about transparency. It's about an open dialogue. And it's about people being flexible in the environment. Often the technology is changing 2-3 times within a short scope of work. And we don't want to hold the work back. But when you give something away for free, what happens then? Right. And that's a genuine challenge for all of us. But we don't want to compromise the client work. So you have a conversation and hopefully it all balances out in the end. And it is an optimistic view, but that's what we have to do now. And that's what we should do.
When you guys prepare these quotes and trying to have these discussions, is there a lot of, I guess, is there a lot of friction? Is there a lot of like resistance? Because, I can see, so I'll use the fast food industry because I feel like that's an industry that a lot of people have exposure to that, they can kind of conceptualize. Some fun factoids for you listeners out there. If you go to Google's IPO based on percentages of return, I believe Domino's Pizza is actually, depending on the month, is beating Google in terms of its percentage ROI. They went to a very digital centric way of ordering and delivering. Chick-fil-A is famously known for having one of the best mobile app ordering systems so that you can pick up your food with the fastest line possible. So if a company sees that and says, we want to do that, and they come to you and they say, hey, Kevin, Mike, Andy, build me a system so I can have an app that's ordering. I have a feeling that some people, well, maybe not a CTO at that level, but like there's a lot of people who I think they think it's just an app. Like, oh, it's going to cost $100,000. Like, I don't know. How are companies so you're laughing because you probably thought of a client that thought like that. Like what is the reaction when they realize that, hey, it's really not, it feels great as a user. It feels super and easy, but to implement it is a big challenge and it's going to require an investment.
I think it's the frame of reference, right? It's so if you're a brand engaging with an agency and you've hired that agency to do creative work or analytics work or media work, that's where you're starting, right? And so there's a particular view on what those organizations do and what their service offerings are. And so as soon as you start to go down the rabbit hole around, well, you need an app or you need an e-commerce solution or you need something that is going to require software engineers, is an example, or data engineers, anything with the word engineers in it. It really starts to change the conversation. And the biggest pivot is, where does that money come from? Because you were hired to be a media agency. And so does that come out of working media dollars for the investments you were going to make to be in commercials and on the web, et cetera, et cetera? Where's the money going to come from to build these solutions, right? So I think it's different if you're engaged with marketing and they've hired you for a particular skill set, and perhaps you can deliver these things above and beyond, or to help complement what your service delivering model looks like, versus maybe a proper software or product development firm that is hired for that set of solutions. And it might be an easier conversation or a more straightforward one.
Yeah, Andy, have you had some of these conversations with your client base?
Yeah, absolutely have. And it does tend to kind of function on that fulcrum of, Kevin, what you were talking about, professional services. Where do I kind of want to self-invest to advance the services that we can offer versus, on the configurable end, and versus when does it flip over to the more of the customized side, where I may have to start to actually ask for something that is either what Mike was talking about, who owns the IP at the end of the day, where do those dollars come from, what is less repurposable than what we could do before. For example, in the marketing realm, we may do a lot of, dashboards, building stuff off of the data. You have engineers, that are going to work on that, but you could repurpose the engineers, you could repurpose the kind of talent for lots of different use cases. But then you're going to have clients that are going to say, this is good, but now I want this. Now I want this extra thing. Now I want this specific report or this specific other thing. And where on that kind of fulcrum does it start to tip over into, repurposable versus something that becomes very, very tailored for a use case? And I think that fulcrum is also what coincides with whether it's going to be internally funded as professional services or externally funded as something very specific for the use case.
And I think what you're seeing, to your question, Albert, is all three of us are leaning heavy on the data side and the customization and looking at insights and looking at things that are actionable. Your question was a little bit broader in terms of helping a client get into a space with technology. I think the best partners are the one that tell you what we're good at, and let's find a partner for you at the things that we're not good at. Right. So if you've got a client that comes to you and says, I want to do something that's outside, your area of experience, you should be celebrated for saying, that's not our sweet spot, and that's not necessarily where you want us to play. Let's go out and find you a development team to develop applications, or let's find, if it's data, if it's analytics, if it's advanced analysis, if it's investment, I'm your guy all day long. And then we'll find the new things together and see what we can develop. But it moves so quick. Everybody can't be an expert on everything. And so what you were talking about was really kind of outside the strong suit of what the three of us have done over our careers in supporting ad agencies. And it's a little bit more hardcore development that probably should be sitting with the client.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that was because my brother is a consultant, and his client, I'm not supposed to say, but I'll say, a mouse is their number one character, I think. And they have theme parks, but they wanted to do like theme park. Well, based on what they do at the theme park and what rides they engage with, and then what they do on, our streaming service, we wanted to be able to let them know when these titles out of the vault are now available. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, yeah, it ends with the message, but to get that message, think of all the connections that had to be built.
Yeah, but think about the great thing that you just said.
Yeah.
These conversations just aren't taking place in a planning meeting. They're taking place on a regular basis. They're tapping all of a company's talent to be able to help and lift a client up. Right? If somebody wants to put me on a phone or Andy on the phone on the client side to help them unlock something on their side, even if it's not our ever experience, we'll brainstorm. We'll talk about it all day long with you, because in the end, what it's going to do is you're going to unlock something that's going to help us with the things that we do for you. That is great time spent. And that's a conversation which should have been happening all along. But over the last, Mike, 5, 6 years, we would get tapped on the shoulder more to say, hey, we're running into a data challenge. We're running into, can you talk to us about how to maneuver in our own environment against this kind of thing? There's the CRM data. How do we move it through the process and protect the PII component and get some insights on it? Those were shoulder taps that we didn't get a decade and a half ago.
Yeah, completely agree. I think guys like Kevin and I, like we would typically be kind of more behind the scenes, right? Our teams would be there to make things go. We have the folks that are working with clients to make the promises and, develop the scopes. And then you have the folks that deliver those promises, right? And so those technical people would be typically behind the scenes. But like Kevin's saying, we're getting tapped on the shoulder a lot more now, because the puzzles that are trying to be solved for really require that talent. And the further that we can move upstream and affect that stuff, it makes your life so much easier as the data starts to flow, and you get to have all these cool and neat conversations around what are we doing with the new information that we're capturing, and are we optimizing or building new things? And that's a lot more fun than say fixing things all the time.
And it goes back to justifying the spend on building things out. It helps cut down on the shadow IT. And when we can't do something, we are able to put some guardrails around the people that know how to do it, so that we can make sure it's sustainable and scalable. And in the end, it always comes back to those kind of things at the end.
What are some of the experiences the brands are now pushing for? Because for someone who's not familiar with the industry, they think to themselves, why is all, I'll use my neighbor actually as a great example. Why does Google need so many smart people? They just make search. Why search ads? Why do so many smart people work in media? Why are they working at Facebook? All they do is serve ads and likes. But we know that's not true. What are the brands?
Let's start with this. Andy, how many Google feeds do we take in a day?
I don't know that I have that many fingers on my hand to count, but yeah.
Why do so many smart people need to work there, Andy?
Well, I think it's interesting. Kind of ties a little bit into the past conversation as well. It's the marketing kind of angle has always been very future thinking, future forward, looking about what's the next thing. They have to kind of stay a step ahead in terms of technology. AI is all the speak, we're talking about LLMs, a lot nowadays, but AI, machine learning, has been in marketing for well over a decade. It's been kind of table stakes for a long, long time. And so we're always kind of looking for that kind of stuff, but also not necessarily to jump on the bandwagon, have kind of some, we have to prevent ourselves from being the bright, shiny object people. We have to kind of be able to see what is coming down the pike. How can we utilize it? And maybe most importantly, when is the right time to utilize it? Because you can start to jump on kind of things, a little bit too early, and you become, a solution looking for a problem. And that's, it's wasting people's time. It's wasting people's money. So you have to be able to kind of really look out there. And I think that's why smart people are drawn to it. We're solving big data problems with billions and trillions of records. We're solving, technology problems about how do we build solutions that sit on top of that and leverage that. And we are always have our finger on the pulse of what's next from a technology perspective. And I think that combination is very exciting for anybody in the technology realm. They want to be always feel like they're utilizing what's now, what's next. And that makes them still stay current and makes them kind of feel very, very engaged. I think that's what brings a lot of people to that.
The way I've explained it internally, let's roll back. Andy's right. I mean, machine learning's been around a decade, 2 decades against that. All of us fell in love with automation 10 years ago for certain functions. As we describe these processes, the way that I would talk about it when we wanted to fund it and what the goal was, it's not disintermediation of people. It's taking people who are looking down at something that can be automated and let the automation deal with that so they can look up and look forward at the results that come out of it and do that next thing, that next evolution in their career, that great client insight. Sometimes it's as simple as taking what is a really crappy task that somebody gets stuck with and making their day less crappy. Sometimes that's enough of a justification for the things that we do on this. But when it comes to automation, when it comes to AI, it's about saying, all right, look down, now look up. Let's look up and let's look forward. Where are the insights? Where's the value? Here's the professional services line again. What insights are we garnering from these tools that we can then say, all right, as a professional service, what are we seeing? How do we advise the clients? How do we advise ourselves? And that's really the cool part of this whole thing. And it sounds incredibly detailed, but I think the goal is the same for everybody. I really think that's the simple goal for everybody, is to look forward and look up as opposed to looking down.
What are some of like the more aspirational either projects or things that you just want to come true that the three of you are working on? I want to go around the horn and hear some of this stuff because the beauty of this is when I was in software, I always bring back my dinosaurness because I stopped in like 2017. But when I was in software, we were developing social media management systems. We had all the top brands, Oreo cookies and all that stuff. They were always talking about, hey, we want to be right message, right play, right person, right time. That was kind of always the arc, right? And now I'm removed from it more. And I think to myself, is that still the mission, or is the mission changing? And what is that experience going to look like? Because, for someone who's not as familiar with marketing, they might think, oh, they're just trying to figure out a perfect ad to send you, right? Maybe that's very oversimplified, but that's exactly how people who are not from this industry think, right? And I'd love to hear some of the things that people are, what is the future of marketing looking like? What is the newer experiences that I think we're going to see? I joked with someone about how tailored feeds, you don't recognize it, but you absolutely 100% appreciate them, because if your feed was not tailored to you, you would hate every software application there is. It would just be gibberish. And if you don't agree with me, turn on Google alerts for what you're interested in and find out how many of those things do you actually read. I'd love to hear some of these projects. Andy, let's start with you.
I mean, my projects are going to be typically internal rather than external. From my end, it's always very audience centric. Coming from a design background, UX is going to be the first thing that comes into my mind. And so my audience in this case is going to be the internal users, with working with Kevin at there. And Kevin knows that, and I think part of our relationship is I am no short on ideas, but he makes sure that I am focusing on the right idea at the right time.
And then he pushes me a little bit more.
Always trying.
Always.
So, what I try to do is have lots of conversations in Canvas with lots of different people at lots of different levels. What are their challenges? What are they working on? And trying to find those synergies between people that may have not have existed before. And obviously, having kind of a product centric mindset, like how can we build something out that can maybe benefit, a broader community within Canvas, and what is the pathway to get there? What are those kind of Legos that we need to stack on top of each other, to get there? So that tends to be my focus in there, is really trying to kind of fill those gaps of where I see them, that they exist.
What are some of the things that teams need that you're working on?
It's trying to understand the individuals within the organization, what they're working on, and how do we kind of bridge some of the gaps that may appear. So for example, we were talking about AI and machine learning. and how that can benefit the clients, but how can it benefit the internal users as well, right? How can it benefit the campaign planners? How can it benefit the strategists inside there? How can we repurpose some of what we're building externally for the internal use cases? And how can we build some kind of like cyclical engine in there where the results of campaigns can then influence the next campaign that's coming on, that influences how media is bought, that influences how media is spent, and then kind of, further compounds on itself in a positive way. Trying to kind of really leverage the technology experiences that exist that we are so heavily investing in for the end client usage, but not forgetting the internal clients as well.
I think that's well put. I'm going to take mine to a higher level because I've got partners like Andy and my internal partners, Jack and Margaret and others. I've often described the job as a CTO of annoying the most and frustrating and annoying the most progressive users by holding them back, and annoying and frustrating the Luddites by dragging them along. Right. And Mike, I want some head nods on this one. Okay. Because what you need to do in the role is to kind of bring the entire agency along as opposed to allowing an even broader execution. Right. You need to lift everybody up. And if you're doing your job right, everybody still likes you, even though you've annoyed almost all of them at the exact same time. I mean, and it's hard to do. And so we do that through, very broad terms. How do we unlock data? Our product officer, our chief product officer, just a wonderful man. And he has been, on his soapbox talking about data democratization. We've got to get to that point. We have to make sure that people can access data and they can understand it. Gone are the days where you didn't trust people with data. Data is everywhere. They're getting it. So stop worrying about that. Make sure the data is accurate, and then go to that next level, which is how do you get into data storytelling? Not just reporting, but how do you get into the data storytelling aspects of this to move it forward? And again, notice we're coming back to what is a professional service as opposed to a commodity that gets negotiated, in an open marketplace. You can buy services. We can buy technology. The value is how do we unlock it? How do we help the clients through data storytelling? Where are those insights? And as we move along, that's where the real focus has been for me and, and for my partners here at Canvas is, we lift everything up by unlocking this data, by making it good. And sometimes it's as simple as making sure that data is just solid and trustworthy, which is where we started with the AI conversation before. Because if people don't trust the data, then everything that comes out of it is not helpful. Or once again, you start to spin up these shadow operations. And so that's what we've been focusing on quite a lot. We've been very successful. It helps that, and again, we have a large number of people here that identify as technologists. And so that helps us in that chase.
All the stuff about data, but one of the things when I follow the news, I always think to myself, hey, all the top brands kind of have access. Well, we would believe that they have access to great data, but they still make mistakes. Things happen. How do you prevent data from leading you astray? Imagine a world where your data flows like electricity, unseen, yet powering everything you do. A world where high availability, low latency, and disaster recovery are not just expectations, but realities. Welcome to the future, powered by Zayo's network. Zayo has meticulously designed North America's largest independent fiber network, a network that isn't just vast, but strategically planned, connecting the places that matter most to you. Thousands of data centers, cloud on-ramps, towers, and critical points of presence. Cross-continental routes unique to Zayo offer connections that you just can't find anywhere else. Zayo provides routing diversity that ensures your operations never skip a beat, and ultra-low latency for when microseconds matter. In a world that never stops, Zayo is the network underneath it all, helping the most innovative and forward-thinking companies grow. Because Zayo doesn't just connect places, they connect possibilities. Discover the power of Zayo's network today. Visit www.zayo.com/network. Because you can have a complete data picture, but you might not have a whole picture, meaning all your data is accurate and clean, but you don't have whether it's the right information or all the information to make a great decision. Mike, how do you prevent data from leading you down the wrong decision path?
I think you have to be really careful about bias, right? So, when you're looking at something like this, let's just say for the sake of argument, most brands have access to the same suite of tools. They have access to a ton of information. Their secret sauce might be their first party data. But the real differentiators, I think, really come down to people and process, right? That's unique to each organization and some way or another. So I think from a people perspective, you have to be very careful about bias. You have to be careful about, maybe personal agendas or a lack of alignment at an organizational level leading you down a path path that maybe isn't prudent, and playing out what the scenarios are. If this happens, what are the likely scenarios or situations that might occur, and how would we tackle that? So I think the personal bias is something to definitely be watchful of. And I think the data governance, Kevin was talking about it earlier, is the quality of that data, the accuracy of it. Do we trust it? Is it appropriate for the kind of use case that we're talking about? Is it relevant? All of those things are terribly important to making good business decisions. And then I think it's the process of having iterative check-ins, right? And so if we're going down a particular path, you don't want to go so far down the path without and skipping past maybe all the stop signs or caution signs along the way. What are you paying attention to help inform that you should continue to go down that path, or maybe make a different decision and pivot your resources to something else?
Mike, you said that beautifully. Let me give you a very practical example of that. Last year, Andy and I did a little skunkworks project with AI. We came up with a synthetic data set. We wanted to see how this AI engine would look and what it would talk about. And we ran the results and we shared it with our product officer and our head of ad ops. And we were very proud of it. And they were both scratching their head. They didn't quite understand the results that came out of it. And they said, "What questions did you ask?" And we talked about what questions they asked. And our ad ops person, Christy, just a great, quick mind, she jumped right on it. You asked the wrong question. You asked the wrong question. And the way that we had asked the question essentially took this AI engine from being a predictive tool to a historical tool. It was looking in the wrong direction based upon the things that we were looking at, the way that we asked the question. When she helped us reframe the question, all of a sudden the results made a lot more sense as we looked. By the way, two of the results exactly flipped, right? I mean, 180% because of the way. And it was, so you talk about bias, which Mike said, then you talk about education on the other side and how you frame the question. And that's where a data committee, that's where other folks that get involved in this can help organizationally try to set that, here, I'm going to use this expression again, put some guardrails around it. So at least from an organization standpoint, you're consistent with the data that's coming out of your models. The responses are coming out of your models. We were very excited once we changed the question, because now all of a sudden we had some partners that had the knowledge that we had, but we wanted to test this out first because we wanted to show the value in the software and the process that was doing it. And then once we asked the right question, everybody got very excited about it, about what we could potentially do with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Kevin actually mentioned in the prior conversation about the storytelling on top of data, which said differently, it's how does the human insight kind of influence or, focus the data insights that are coming out? Before we definitely had a data starved kind of, trajectory back in the past, and now we are very functioning on a data overloaded sense, and we still have the garbage in, garbage out product, and that obviously has a problem on everything up to AI. But there is also this idea of objective garbage in, garbage out, and subjective garbage in, garbage out. And what I mean by that is the idea of a single source of truth. Truth, assumes that there is a level of stability that's lying underneath, but a lot of the decisions can be much more fluid, and you have to be, as Kevin mentioned, asking the right questions, but you also have to have the right governance on top of it. You can get data from lots of different sources, and they can also tell you slightly different things, and you need that person to sit on top of it that can actually drive the insights in an intelligent way. Otherwise you run the risk of maybe relying on the data too much in a vacuum of its own.
It's very easy to be a digital hoarder, right? Companies do it. Your legal department wants to do it, right? Because you want to mitigate risk. And the more of a digital hoarder a person or an organization is, the more problematic getting good answers out of these systems becomes. Right? In the old days, it used to be for TV. Well, how many ratings did you keep? Well, you kept Olympics to Olympics or election to an election and a quarter. It was very easy, right? You kept 4 years and 1 quarter's worth of data. And the world doesn't operate like that anymore. And so the stupid stuff is not stupid. Data retention policies, archiving policies, get the noise out of your operational space, right? Because now all of a sudden it starts to unlock the tools in different ways, and it makes sure that those results that are coming out really are current and thoughtful. Yay to the person that saves 47 iterations of an Excel spreadsheet. I need the last two. I need the last two. right? And so as we talk about this, hey, there's versioning built into SharePoint. There's whatever it is. And now you start to get better utilization of these core tools that your IT team has been sitting on and pushing for a decade and a half, saying, if you use this tool that we have licensed for you forever, this way, the AI model is going to give you a better answer, and here's why. And so now you're down to cultural and behavior changes that really kind of lift up the end result. So all these things work together. Nobody gets left behind in this conversation. Everybody gets more engaged.
And I think there's a level of archaeology that goes with this as well, right? So, as we're talking about AI, so much of that happens in a black box that people don't really see what's going on inside of it. And we run the risk of kind of like trusting what's coming out of there. But if we can approach it in such a way that we can start to peel back an onion so that we can start to trust the first layer, then we're more likely to trust the next layer of data that comes back after that. And we can go a little bit further, we can go a little further, rather than going all the way down, to some kind of like nugget of information, a KPI really like low down in the data, and just trusting that kind of in a vacuum again. I think we have to kind of, there has to be a trust relationship with the data and the outputs that are being conveyed. And that goes back to the storytelling aspect of it as well, right? So you're trying to tell stories at a high level. You're trying to give insights that give you answers, but also beget more questions, that you can get more answers, which beget more questions, which give answers. And as you kind of go down that, you engender that trust as you're going down the kind of, that archaeology of the data, going deeper and deeper into it.
The thing I'm most excited about, one of the things I'm most excited about with this entire proposition is knowledge management within an organization, right? So the democratization of information, the democratization of real knowledge, right? When I started my career 20 years ago, I absorbed a lot of that from folks that I worked with that had been in the business for 20 or 30 years, and you just sort of absorb it in the office through osmosis. You hear how they talk, you hear how they present information. And so to have the ability, or at least the prospect of accelerating an employee's journey, their career, their knowledge, and the value that they can create for their clients, similar to what Kevin described earlier, where so much of what we do is heads down and manual, that prospect is all, in my view, built on the idea of really being disciplined about the governance, the quality, the lineage, leveraging the tools that we have, and this idea of like measure twice, cut once kind of stuff. And it's very hard in our industry and many others because it's built into our DNA that we're just go, go, go. Got to be fast, got to be first, right? And so that discipline flies in the face of a pretty big character trait for marketing agencies. And I think the successful agencies will figure out a way to balance that, but always with an eye towards the payoff is so unbelievable for our people. And I believe people are every organization's secret sauce. If you can enable your people and get them hooked up with all this extra power that AI could presumably provide, the world could be your oyster. There's a lot of opportunity.
When I talked before about frustrating people on either side of the technology scale in an organization, Mike, you said it much better than I did, in that case, because it really is helping lift them up, across the board. One of the things that goes unnoticed, and we would all be remiss in not talking about this, it's very easy to say technologists do this, progressive media people do this, developers do this. Our best partners in all of this are the folks that you would never expect. It's a finance team that helps you figure out, how do you move the investment around? How do you prioritize spend to lift the organization up? And your legal team, who now has to change and look at things in incredibly different ways. A privacy officer didn't exist 10 years ago in our space, right? Now they're sitting right next to you for every decision that you make. So these are all things now that are part of the ecosystem that we deal with. They're moving at a faster rate too. Right? Nothing finance hates more than a surprise. So you're with them on a weekly basis, talking about spend, talking about changes, talking about how to deal with it. You're sitting on a Wednesday night, true story, with general counsel, and you pour a drink in the office and you argue the minutia, at 8 o'clock at night, because the next day that's going to get something passed through much faster. You don't have to have the conversation while you're trying to do the red lines. You're getting in line. So these in-person conversations, this back and forth that your IT team is doing, your finance and your legal teams, really does unlock moving forward in a much faster way. And it just sounds almost ridiculous falling out of my mouth, but I promise you it's true.
I loved how you guys clarified how the technology is moving forward, how you're moving people together to make these great decisions. I got to ask more like almost like a business case question. I'm curious, as we get better at all of these things, there's a hidden sauce though that still is like the human decision tree, right? Like you could still have all this data that says do this and still be like, well, I think it's still a bad idea. And I want to go to one specific use case, and I'd love to hear how you would either A, prevent that, or B, do you use it as a way to say like in the future, these things are going to be mitigated because of X, Y, and Z. So we'll go back to Disney. Famously, their Star Wars hotel was not a success, even despite all the data suggesting that it would be. People would love Star Wars. People love the IP. No one saw it and said it didn't look right. I mean, it looked right. It was like exactly what these worlds were. But somehow it was a miss. Could data have prevented that? Or is there's still that piece of human technology, the human intuition that says, hey, even though all of this is true, I don't think people want to spend whatever, $1,000 a night at a hotel.
Boy, I don't know. I'm a Star Wars fanatic. I was definitely in the camp that thought that was like the coolest idea ever. And then I heard about the price. So there's a part of me that good old fashioned market research maybe would have prevented that idea moving forward, or maybe a different business model in the grand scheme of things. I don't know, Albert. That's a good one. I still feel like you're gonna need people that know what good looks like, what you're trying to accomplish, what a good and rational decision might be, because the data always paints a picture, but it's sort of like stats. You can make data do all kinds of things, right? And so I think you need a group of people at the table to interpret it the right way and figure out whether or not it makes sense to execute it.
Yeah, and I mean, not knowing what happened behind the curtains there, I mean, was there data that told them a different story that they didn't see, that they didn't listen to,
or did they ask the wrong question?
Or did they ask the wrong questions? But I mean, I also come back to the user experience part. Like, did they talk to the potential consumers? Not outside of just the aesthetics of it, but the price, but the experience. I've seen, some reports that the overall experience there wasn't up to certain standards as well. So being able to kind of be really in touch with your audience or audiences, because there's always different audiences you're trying to appease, and really making sure that you are clued into each one of them, that they are satisfying whatever needs you are trying to satisfy in each one of those audiences. And I have a suspicion that, certain audiences were missed in that use case.
We're not going to know. By the way, I'm suppressing a desire to say, just travel with Star Wars sheets and check into a Motel 6. You get the same experience.
This is why I don't travel with Kevin, by the way.
I suppress this.
Kevin's Mr. Practicality. He's Mr. Practicality.
This is as good as it gets.
It's Mr. Practicality. I like it.
Albert, when your team reached out to do this podcast, they reached out to me. And I had some reticence about doing it. And that's because it's important that all the voices are heard in the process, right? So I reached out to somebody who I work with on a daily basis and somebody who I've always wanted to work with, right? And you bring it together because you want all of those voices. Whether or not you guys put this up to be streamed, whether or not we like the edits, the three of us are going to walk away with a slightly different take on what we thought about before we spent this hour together. That's the value, right? So we don't know what happened at Disney. We assume that happens, but you don't know if a CEO got locked in, if there was a contractual obligation, whatever it was that went wrong. We know at our level how to battle that. And that is to talk to people you trust, talk to people you don't agree with, hire a development firm that you give a scope of work and then they pick away and say, we should do 4 or 5 things more, right? And that they challenge you and make you uncomfortable. And, I'd be remiss to say that, we talk about that in our organization all the time. Challenge the comfortable on a regular basis. Bring these people in, hear the voices. Look, somebody needs to be a decision maker. Groups don't make decisions, all right? But make sure you've got all of those voices in your head before you move on forward. Did that happen at Disney? Who knows? But each one of us has had that problem on a daily and a weekly basis. Do we have the right people? And everything that we did on our own ended up being a vanity act, and we probably regret it.
Well said. Listen, It was a pleasure having you three on the show. My biggest takeaway from the entire conversation is that, of course, you have to have the right questions. You have to have the most accurate and precise information. But probably what should make everyone out there listening feel a little bit better is you still need the right people, the contrarian opinion, the person that's willing to ask uncomfortable questions to the different audience and customers. And then you need like a little bit of gut instinct. You got to have a little bit of guts to be like, hey, because maybe someone just said, hey, man, I just don't think people want to spend $1,000 a night. Like, I think if this was $200 a night, they'd be happier. Something that just, I wouldn't say reality, but a different point of view. Like Kevin, you kind of suggest, like, if everyone's thinking the same way, then no one's saying no, then you'll just execute a bad plan very well, which is still a disaster.
I'm pretty sure that anything I've ever said in my life, anything good that I've said, Aaron Sorkin wrote at some point. And there's a line in a West Wing episode, and the line is, but who writes the Great Dissent? That gets looked up later on, that they look back and helps craft what the new policy is, what the new approach is, right? And those are the moments that we're talking about, except we're having them real time. Technology means we don't have time for history to do it. We have to hear it now. We have to keep it in the back of our mind, and we have to move forward that way.
There you go. Well, gentlemen, it was great having you on IT Visionaries. I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your insights. Till next time, everybody.